My name is Tobias Mews, Phil Davis. We've known each other since approximately 2004, and we were in the army together, and I joined his regiment as essentially his replacement as a troop commander. And so he kind of basically taught me everything he didn't know. His handover to his job was appalling, and I essentially followed him and his career for about 6 years until we decided, by complete fluke, to leave the army. And we didn't even talk about it. We just announced that we were going to leave, and it was to the day almost that we came to this decision. And so the wonderful thing about being in the army is you have this kind of funny identity. Essentially, you're a trained killer. And it's quite cool when someone says, "What do you do for a living?" And you say, "I'm in the army." And they think of you a real roughy-tufty. And in fact, we're not really. Most of us get quite fat and we drink too much and eat too much. And we're actually quite unfit in the army, but you don't see that bit. So we left. This is a good thing. And we left, and we needed to find a new identity. And Phil phoned me, and I was currently living in France at the time, where my home was. And he said, "Mate, it's this thing called the Marathon Sun. We talked about this. Shall we enter? It's the entrance is tomorrow. We need to be on our computers at 11 o'clock on the dot, mouse ready, because apparently it kind of sells out within about half an hour. Now we're entering for 2011, and it's now 2008 in July. So it's quite a long way around. We're about to essentially lose our jobs. About to put down a 500 quid deposit on a race that we'd never even done an ultra marathon before. I'd done one marathon, you like millions of years ago, and you hadn't even done one. It was a pretty kind of stupid idea. But we thought this is good. We'll have focus, and we're going into our new lives. So we would enter this race. And by fluke, I got in. He didn't. He actually got on the waiting list. Although he was there at the time, mouse ready. So it's a nice phone call that ensued. "Did you get a place?" "Yeah, mate, I did." So essentially, who's actually who kind of knows? Does everybody know about the Marathon Summit? Pretty much, yeah, nods. Who's done it? Anyone? That's good if no one's done, because we don't actually know what we're talking about, which is good. You can't say no, it wasn't like that.
Like our whole way through the presentation.
Yeah, it's good if you know that move now. And so who would actually like to do it, or is signed up to do it in about a million years' time? So you've got 1, 2, 3 people. And any time like soon, like next year, year after, next year. So this might be quite useful. So you become a sponge. To anyone mentioned the MDS, you go, "Oh, God, tell me about it. I want to hear." So essentially, long story short, 7 marathons, 6 days. You always say this. It's referred to that. Have you done that thing in the desert? That race in the desert. They don't actually know what it's called. They just know there's some weird race that's meant to be really, really hard. It's described as the toughest foot race on the planet, and it's in the Sahara, and lots of people do it, and it's inordinately expensive at £3,500 each year. It goes up in price, and you can buy a good car for that, couldn't you? Second hand, obviously you've got one for that, same price. So what we'll do, is we'll launch into a little video to set the scene. They've got this massive 55-minute DVD which they give you free, lucky old us, at the end of it for our £3,500, and this is a sort of shortened version that I put together. Day 2, not a good day. It's very dusty. This is what sells it, I think. It's the elements, isn't it? Not that bit, that's not so cool.
That person's actually blind. There are 2 blind people taking part this year. I got overtaken by one. I did.
That's on day 4, when essentially the lead runners are overtaking those less quick. night of the longest day, essentially now. It's a pretty low point in most people's race.
That camel you see, basically that's the sort of the cut-off. If you come in after the camel, then technically you're sort of disqualified from the
Look
race.
how slow the camels go. It's like, oh god, I want to speed up. Patrick Barr on the left there, he's like the most famous man in Morocco, I think, for this race.
It's a very nice tradition. The last person to cross the line on the 4th day, which is double marathon day, everyone, no matter what state you're in, comes out to greet them and welcome them in. It's really nice.
And also, it's just after the tsunami, so essentially this chap from Japan is getting a big kind of massive well done.
Okay, basically just the premise of our talk is from, completer to completer. Now, I clearly was the completer. Toby's just trying to complete it. Really, just sort of like, compare us really. Very similar age, weight drastically different, and body fat drastically different. One of the main key things on the NDS, people ask what can you do, how much training, etc. The amount of weight you're carrying around in your own body makes a huge difference, and that's one of the things that really sort of caused my feet to basically fall apart, I think. We've got a very different sort of history in what we've done, racing-wise, etc. But Tobes went there to compete. I mean, from the day one, he wanted to be the first Brit to cross the line. I went there, I wasn't too sure what I was going to do. I just sort of wanted, I came up with a catchphrase, which was, I want to finish each day in the best possible condition to start the next one. And that was all I wanted to achieve and just get around it, basically. So two very, very different approaches, and hopefully we will explain either end of it, and then there's something in the middle for everybody, really.
Right, so pretty much the figures speak for themselves here a bit. People say, oh, are you going for a time? And I had a vague time in my head, and essentially I wanted to beat the tall bloke who can row, and he did it in about 26 hours dead. I think he was 25 hours or 25 hours something or other. So I had a kind of vague notion. I thought, I can run pretty much faster than he can. He can't run at all, and but he did really, really well. And you can note the kind of starting pack weight there. With a race like this, when you're self-supported, it all comes down to essentially, really, how much you're carrying here in your gut, and equally what you're obviously carrying in your pack. The minimum weight is 6.5 kilos that you have to carry, plus water. So essentially, I got down to about 6.7, 6.8, and then I added my water and my flare, which is kind of irritatingly heavy. And a big thing here is the kind of essentially the heavier you are, the more likely, essentially the slower you are, the more likely you're going to lose weight, because essentially, as Stu so brilliantly said, you're burning fat. I was kind of burning, God knows what I was burning, but I was burning not very much, and blisters.
I lost a stone. I entered the MDS to try and sort of keep thin, so for me it was like a 1 week shock, weight loss.
You put it back on again quite quickly afterwards, yeah. I know it's nasty, isn't it? But we can do this. We've known each other well. We can do worse. We went to a rock. Anyway, so here we go. The chap on the left is Rashid. Now he is like Mohammed Ansel's prodigy. He was the guy. The two of them, they trained together. In fact, Ansel trained this bloke to essentially beat him, which is kind of a curious notion. And you can kind of see the sort of times you're going there. I think on the first day I was 30th, and it kind of gradually got a bit quicker. But already I'm an hour behind the leader from day one. So any notion of you're going to win is probably going to have to disappear out of the window. Big thing to notice here, though. Essentially, look at the blue boxes. Phil, brave man. His longest day was the same time as pretty much my entire race. So if you can put that into context, there's a kind of a big difference in what we went through individually. So we never saw each other essentially until kind of the end, until the plane flight on the way back. Big times. But the guy that won 20 hours is, it's pretty brilliantly quick for 250k.
As far as training goes, as you can imagine, pretty sort of different approaches. I had not so long ago sort of popped a disc in my spine playing rugby, so I couldn't train that much anyway. Plus, if I'm honest, I'm quite idle when it comes to training as well. I averaged about 20k a week. I work in London, so I was running from London Bridge to Westminster and back, maybe twice at lunchtime. It's a bit throwaway. I was I was integrating weight. I was doing a few other sort of longer runs. My longest run really was with Tobes when I ran about 12 miles, I think, 12 or 13 around some parks.
And give the details of that, mate. How did that work?
Slowly for me.
And who was carrying the weight?
You were.
Yeah, and what were you carrying?
Nothing.
Yeah. and then he kind of just borrowed the sack for a bit, just to see what it's like. And he carried it for about a couple of miles, and we went, you can have it back now. And then we carried on. It was fun.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
basically, I didn't do that much training, but I know that I'm pretty mentally robust. So I was quite happy to sort of fall back on that. And I was putting all my eggs in that basket. It was a big sort of gamble, but I was as confident as you can get that I'd be okay. I wasn't looking for a blisteringly fast time. The one thing, what would I have done differently? I would have, for what I did, I would have spent a lot more time on my feet. So I'd have gone out on a Saturday or a Sunday and done a sort of an 8, 9, 10 hour walkie jog and just been on my feet for a long time. That's what I think is the best way you can actually train for the MDS. In addition, I was actually going into saunas and bits and pieces like that to try and accustom myself to heat, which an awful lot of people do. You hear a lot of other stories about guys building heat chambers in their garage and all kinds of crazy stuff, which I heard about at the airport and scared the living daylights out of me.
Yeah, mine was quite different. I essentially started training for this event about 2.5 years before it actually happened, pretty much from the point that we entered it. And once you get this sort of bug, this obsession of entering races and doing bits and bobs, you start doing it every weekend. And suddenly before you know, you never really kind of have a sort of a tapering period or a recovery period. You're just racing and training all the time. So I never kind of approached the race that, right, I'm going to have a 5-month plan, I'm going to go and steadily increase my mileage. I just pretty much carried on how I went. In fact, 6 months before the race, I entered I did an Ironman with Phil in the summer previous, and then I went and did a month later something called the Transalpine Run, which is an 8-day race across 320 kilometres, across the Alps of like 15,000 metres of climbing. It's pretty nails. And I kind of thought after the end of that, I thought, well, if I can do that, I can clearly do the MDS. I thought, actually, the MDS might be easier. In fact, the MDS is an entry race to the UTMB. I mean, it's what people use as a qualifying race just to get to the start of the 2,500 people. The other people, everybody's done the MDS, you know. And so my training plan was pretty much just what I was doing normally. I did Bikram yoga as my that was exhausting. I tell you what.
So you laugh, a lot of people do it.
Yeah, it's really good. I bumped into another bloke in Balham, where I live, doing it as well. We realised when we met in the desert that we'd been in the same Bikram yoga class. And it's quite random, I couldn't recognise you. And the maximum distance, I mean, when Stu was speaking, I can't agree more wholeheartedly with what you're saying. My biggest training week was maybe 50, 60 miles. I mean, essentially, if I did a race, that would be when I'd have my biggest mileage. But I cycled, I was still doing sort of triathlon training and swimming and bits and bobs like that. It wasn't anything drastic. You're only doing essentially a marathon every day. You're doing it slowly. The big difference is, if 95% of people walk it. So a lot of times you hear people say you have to practice walking with weight. I knew, and as Stu said, positivity, I said, right, well, I've never walked a race in my life. Why am I going to start walking now? I've been carrying rucksacks for the last 10 years. I know I can run with this. So I ran, and that's all I did. I just ran and cycled and swam, and I wouldn't have done anything differently. In order to do better, I'd probably go and practice in the desert. I'd probably go and do one of Mohammed Ansel's training camps, and I would probably run a bit more with my rucksack. I didn't do any running. I did one 20-miler with a rucksack. Most of the time I would do short 5 or 6, 7 miles. I didn't want to ruin my knees. And the ultimate plan is to get there injury-free.
Kit, it's something you end up obsessing about. It really is. You become obsessed with what kit you take, how much it weighs, and you pour huge amounts of money into it. I suppose if you start looking at the main bits and pieces, you've got your trainers, really down to individual choice. I went for Innovation, you went for Salomon, didn't you?
Yeah, I got a free pair. Someone just gave them to me and I thought that would do. Yeah. I did. I wanted to spend as little money as possible on this race. It was already costing the earth, and I thought half the time you end up buying extra kit, don't you?
With trainers, it's worth noting that most people buy them 1.5 to 2 sizes bigger than you normally wear them because your feet swell that much. I did buy them about 1.5 sizes bigger than mine, and on the last day I didn't in the end, but I almost cut the toes off because my feet had sort of swollen up that much.
And I was going to add to that. because I got given a pair of trainers, essentially a mate of mine bought a pair of Salomon Speedcross 2s, and he said, well, mate, I never even used them. He said, do you want these? They're too big for me, or too small for me, but they might be a bit, bigger. And they were half the size bigger than what I currently ran with, and I slightly panicked that it might be too small, but they didn't. They were fine, absolutely fine.
I'd say with rucksacks and things like that, use what you're used to. Don't go and buy something new, just use what's trialled. Tobes did that, and he was comfortable with it from beginning to end. I got myself a Raid Light, and I was a bit nervous it was going to break on the first day because of the weight, and it's not that sort of strong. You try and shave grounds wherever you can, and you're looking for the lightest rucksack as well, clearly. When you're talking about actually shaving weight off, creature comforts is quite an interesting area where we sort of compare and contrast. I took a little bit more stuff to wear in the evening. I had some compression pants and a sort of a thermal top and a windproof top. I had a sort of a battery charger so I could charge up my iPod. So I had an iPod, I had a camera. These were all luxuries. I had nothing else. I had one pair of socks for every other day. And apart from that, it was all pretty much mandatory kit and food. And my pack went up to 12.5 kilos. Goes up very, very quickly. Tobes was, well...
I was a weight Nazi.
Yeah,
literally, I got my kitchen scales out. I should have had digital ones, but I didn't. And I weighed everything. I knew how much pieces of paper weighed. I knew, you hear stories about people cutting their toothbrush in half. I didn't bother doing that. I thought that was pointless. It only weighed 5 grams. So
I heard a story of someone who actually shaved the bristles off their toothbrush as well. Literally shaved the bristles right down.
Yeah.
So
you try everything. You're cutting even the labels, the sides of your packets of food. You cut those corners off. But my model was essentially, could I survive without it? You have your mandatory kit, which involves like a kind of first aid kit. But the first aid kit, people were taking like massive medical boxes. There's an entire squadron of doctors. You've got more medicine than a general hospital has. They've got Nurofen tablets coming out of everywhere. So I kind of essentially ditched most of my stuff. The heaviest thing is your food, find out. The English love eating, and we take far more than anyone else. The rucksack thing, I've been using an 25-litre rucksack forever, and I agonised, saw James Cracknell had an Arn. I thought, what's an Arn? I must look at this, and spoke to Likey's, who are like the purveyors of all kit for ultra runners, and they said, yeah, he used one of those, I must get, and they're 100 quid, and I thought, oh, I don't want to spend 100 quid on a rucksack. So I used the same one I've been using for like 3 years, and it worked. That's the whole point. Trust what works. Don't try something new because it's a new race. Creature comforts, I had none. I didn't take a watch. I didn't take a camera, I didn't take any paper to write a diary, I didn't take any gel, I didn't take any comfort kind of foods, pepperoni, a couple of sticks, and I took a shuffle, an iPod shuffle, because I thought that's going to be my kind of break in case of emergency piece of kit. And then the gaiters is you hear about sand, everybody thinks sand, blisters, we agonised a bit, and I bought a pair of gaiters, and then I found another pair of gaiters, so I bought those as well, and I kind of looked at them. But it costs 35 quid to sew your gaiters on each time, so you're not gonna, and you only got one pair of trainers, so you can't really kind of trial them out properly, and you can't find sand unless you go to Wales. There's a big thing with the Big Dipper, which people kind of navigate their way to, and just find this hill and start running up and down it weirdly. But kit is obsessive, even in simple races like this. Not so simple, but it's you don't have to worry too much. But there, you know that if you don't have it, then you can't get any more of it. Absolute bollocks, because people bring so much kit, you can borrow stuff. People are giving away kit. You can swap kit for food. It's like a bartering system going on. There's this English chap who's pretty dull, and he's out there. He's your kind of intermediary go-getter guy. He's actually employed just to kind of make our lives easier and to go between tents swapping stuff if you're missing a buff or whatever. And that's it. It's obsessive, but actually don't obsess with it because it's not worth it.
Nutrition is probably the most important thing. It's more important than kit. The bottom line is if you forget something, like Tobe says, you can go and borrow it or make it up somehow. If it breaks, you can fix it. Nutrition is what actually gets you around. What I'd say is basically I spent a fair bit of money, well, not loads of money, but I spent about £150 on my food, probably, maybe a little bit more. What I would advocate massively is take stuff you like. Because while you're going around and you're a bit low, you're a bit tired, if you sort of pull out a pepperami or if you like sort of peanuts and raisins and chocolate, okay, they'll all be melted, but it's a nice taste, and just give yourself little treats. I carried quite a lot of food because I knew I was going to be out for a long, long time and I was going to need the calories. So I didn't mind carrying a couple extra kilos of food. Initially, my food weighed 8 kilograms, which is as much as Tobias' bag with water. The day before the race, I was jettisoning stuff all over the place. But it's vital.
And again, I didn't actually start really planning my food until about a week before the race, which is not good. And everybody goes and buys these expedition foods, and brilliant they are. In theory, they're not. They're dried food. They cost £6 a packet, and they say, right, you need to go and have a breakfast. So you go, okay, cool. And then you need to go and have a main course and a pudding. So, it's spending the best part of 18 quid a day on food you don't even know if you're going to like, because you're not going to go and spend 100 and whatever quid buying all this food, just, have a meal for an entire week and go, oh, I don't like the look of, pepperoni and cheese, whatever. So essentially, I negated all that. I didn't want to spend any more money, because it's really expensive. So I went to Sainsbury's, and I bought noodles for 18p, and I added garam masala. In fact, everything I bought for the race, for the food, came from Sainsbury's. There's nothing you don't need. Did speak to someone who knew more about food than I did, and we discussed it a bit about what you need. And so essentially, I added herbs and salt to my main course. I knew I've been eating tuna and pasta for I don't know how long. I mean, who else eats that? Everybody. So I knew that I could survive on the same food every day. So that wasn't a problem. I had one expedition food as my little treat after the long day, and I kind of I measured my food according to how long the day was and how much I'd need. The big thing, though, is what you're going to eat on the day. Now, gels don't count. You have to have 2,000 calories a day. So gels weigh loads, and I had half a kilo's worth of recovery powder. Didn't get them for goodness. I used Nesquik and skim milk powder and salt. Again, it's all available. It costs nothing. It was I had quite a kind of simple method. But I tell you what, I didn't get hungry once. The key is to eat within like half an hour to maximum 2 hours of finishing a race. That's when your body craves food, and if you do it then you're not going to be hungry later on. Don't even think you're going to go and have a nice dinner with your mates in the evening and it's all going to be glamorous under the stars. All you want to do is get your head down. The moment it gets dark, there's nothing else to do. You're not going to go and use your head torch because you want to use up the batteries, and so you get in your pit and you sleep, and that's it. And the salt tablets, last thing, you hear people frothing at the mouth about salt. Again, if you add salt to your food as you're eating it, then essentially you get enough salt there. They recommend that you take 2 tablets, I think, of the first 1.5 bottles, 1.5 litres at each checkpoint, and you just have to remember to take a couple. I swallowed them. Phil was going, "Oh, you have to chew them, mate," and I was going, "That's disgusting."
I still stand by this. They're in a wax coating. We're going to get into an argument about this. They're in a wax. Anyway, it's basically people ask about how much salt you should and shouldn't eat. I always sort of say, look, if it tastes good, then have more of it. If it doesn't taste right, then don't. And I had times when I was chewing salt tablets, which are just pure blocks of salt. And I was chewing them, I was like, oh, it's the best thing ever. So I was just having loads. Other times I'd have one and I was like, I'd actually spit it out. It was horrible. The same goes with water, same goes with whatever you're eating. If it feels right in your mouth and feels right in your body, then have it. If it doesn't, then you probably don't need it. Your body's talking to yourself on a quite sort of a basic level, so listen to it. Make sure we go on to the... What we're going to do now is we're just going to sort of rattle through the different race experiences, really. I've got lots of pictures because I took a camera. Tobes didn't. And that's one of the differences. When you're sort of trying to shave every single gram, that's what matters.
150 grams for a camera.
The race itself, and people don't really acknowledge this, for me and for most others, it starts at the airport.
That's me, isn't it?
That's when you...
Sorry,
that's when you start sort of sizing up all your competitors, and you're sort of wondering to yourself, look, how fast that bloke going to go? And you start hearing all the sort of the stories about how people have been training in heat chambers.
And you're staring at their rucksack to see what they've bought, and you're very happy if they've all got the same one as you. Phil, you were happy, weren't you?
Yes, very. The race starts at the airport. You're sizing everyone up, and that's not everyone's really helpful, really on side, but that's when you're there. And for me, the best thing was I wasn't asked anymore, why are you doing it? Because before you go, incessantly people are asking why, and you've all got your reasons, but there people just understand that it's what you want to do. We've chatted about kit briefly. That was mine laid out. One thing I didn't mention was walking poles or running poles. I took them and they were well worthwhile. Getting to the start line itself, you go on buses quite a long way and then get onto military trucks and try and move on that way because you have to go right into the desert itself. Mentioned that I was really nervous about my bag breaking. I heard a story about someone the year before whose strap had actually snapped off, and I was worried mine was, so I went sort of running around before the race started just to check it was okay. Each day you'd start off and you'd go across the line to Highway to Hell. It was quite funny. You'd all go off on a massive high and sort of full of beans, and then 50 metres, 100 metres on, everyone sort of just suddenly slump again. You see a couple of pictures of sort of Vimba stuff. That's the charity I did it for. It's a nice thing to do, but it is quite an extra bit of work to sort of raise the money for the charity.
And just worth noting, the British are pretty much the only people that raise money for charity for the MDS. Everybody else sacks it off. It's just a holiday.
As far as the days go, clearly it's sort of over 7 days. Day one traditionally is sort of 20-ish K over this kind of hard pack stuff. It's just meant to be sort of break you in. This year it was sort of 33K and half of it was over proper sand dunes. Now,
that's it. That's what
those sand dunes are actually the highest in the Sahara apparently, and I do believe them. So you turn up and everyone's sort of ready for a 20K, but you don't know what the race actually holds. And we all got a bit of a rude shock that the dune day was on the first day. Those are the dunes. You can sort of see, I don't know if you can make them out, but those are people. So you get an idea of the scale. It was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Those are the camels we mentioned. I had continual battles with them. One day they actually took over me, and I was about 3 hours behind them, but we'll come over to that. That's day one. And it sort of went rapidly downhill from there. That's my little toe. It looks very sort of red and raw, because it is. But it's not all sort of doom and gloom and pain. That's sort of the sunrise we had from the tent in the morning. So you had your moments of beauty as well. It's really, really nice. I will just caveat everything now with my race was about managing my feet in the end, and that's what I was doing. I wasn't sort of trying to cover ground quickly. Every single footstep was a conscious thought. So that's where I was sort of in my head a lot of the time. This is one of the hills you sort of go up. I think this one's nicknamed the mountain that cleanses the soul. My soul felt fairly clean at that point. I wonder if I can sort of dodge it. They tried to include dunes every single day, which they haven't done historically. There you go, there's my feet day 2.
Army issue socks there. That's cool feel.
So here you can actually, that's on day 2 with a sort of a blister forming underneath a blister already. So, and a lot of the reason for that is because I turned up too heavy, basically, I think. We mentioned the sandstorm day. I loved it, absolutely loved it. I wouldn't have loved it if it sort of lasted for 3, 4, 5 days, but for one day it was fantastic. You just really got into the elements and sort of tested yourself.
That's Phil on the left that looked like a terrorist.
Yeah, I cut out a little mouthpiece. And that's my breakfast. I used to have like oats, then I have some protein powder, pour some water into the morning, and then eat it, chuck it away. It's quick. Day 3, I end up getting my nails lanced because I had so much pressure underneath them. Had it done to both my toenails. And this was before the double marathon day. So I was getting a little bit concerned at this point because actually that night they drove me from the med centre, or from the med tent to our tent, which was about 300 metres, because they took pity on me. And while I was in the car, I was like, oh God, I've got 82 Ks to do tomorrow. And I can't cover 300 metres, I might have my hands full. I became a bit of a celebrity in getting your feet sorted out. The doctors are amazing, like genuinely amazing. They strap you up and they just sort of send you off again, and they really look after you. They were phenomenal. That's my feet before I actually set off on the double marathon. For me, at this point, they ration your water quite carefully. So I actually hit this point at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. They only gave us 1.5 litres of water, and I had to cover from 12 till 4 with 1.5 litres of water. I got really dehydrated, and I was rationing myself, but at one point I put some water in my mouth just to feel it swilling around, and I swallowed it. So I did it again because I wanted to feel it, and I did it a few more times. I couldn't actually believe what was happening, but the water was being absorbed by my tongue and my gums. And at that point, I was like, I've been dehydrated before, but nothing close to this. I carried on sort of getting fairly dehydrated, actually, and it wasn't due massively to mismanagement. I just wasn't getting enough water for when I was out in the sun. So I ended up going down with some pretty sort of severe It's dehydration.
Notice he still had the nerve, though, to ask someone to take a photo of him. Di, can you just take a quick photo?
I did.
That's how vain he is, even in death.
But no, joking aside, this point, the next checkpoint I had to get to at 1 in the morning, and I got here, and if I didn't hit that next checkpoint, it's one of the few times in the race where they actually say if you don't hit it in a certain time, your race is over. And for me, it was a real sort of dilemma. And so they put in 6 litres of fluid into me, I think 40 minutes. The average A&E rate is 1 litre every 6 hours. And they were sort of squeezing the bags, trying to get it into me faster. And I just wanted to like unhook myself and go. At one point, I did unhook myself and run off, and they pulled me back. Told me, I found out after the race that they think I was like literally a couple of minutes away from a coma, and something arguably more serious. So I was quite close to the wire. And luckily, one doctor sort of backed me and said, "Look, I think you'll be okay." And off I went, and I was, but that moment was relatively touch and go. People often ask, what's your high point and your low point of the race? Mine was exactly the same point. After that, I was miles behind everyone, literally. Everything was sort of collapsed. All the silings which were marking your route had gone. So I was navigating by the stars across the dunes, trying to get to the next checkpoint by the 1 o'clock cut-off. I hate saying this because it sounds really melodramatic, but I would have killed myself at that point to finish. Not finishing it just wasn't an option, or I just wouldn't concede it at all. So I was petrified that I wouldn't finish. But at the same time, this is the first time I was really running because I had all this fluid in me, and I was running across the dunes, actually at the same speed as Tobes was. So for that one checkpoint, I sort of experienced the speed that he was running at, and I was navigating with my compass and by the stars, and it was liberating. So on one hand, I was genuinely petrified. On the other hand, I was having the best time ever. That's me at that next checkpoint. I was much happier than I look. And then at the end of the double marathon day, I came in at about 11 o'clock, and you can see here it's sort of 9:30 and already 41 degrees. That's me at the finish line of the double marathon day. I'm trying to give a massive smile, and I am smiling inside. Inside, I'm jubilant. I really am. But my face wouldn't work. So that's all. I tried as hard as I could. I was beaming from from hairline to hairline, but it just didn't happen on my face. There's always people who have it tougher than you. This guy ended up losing the soles of his feet. He has to get his skin grafted onto the bottom of his feet. And
he came out with his son to do this race. I mean, they're together, and that was his greatest joy, is to be able to run with his son. So the story behind him, and it passed around the camp pretty quickly.
This guy was an inspiration. He was absolutely phenomenal. He went into the med tent. I was in there at the same time as him, and he still wanted to carry on. The doctors weren't saying no. It was amazing. More toenails at the end of the long day. More blisters. That's the tents we used to sleep under. On the 6th day, I got attacked by dogs. 2 dogs came out, circling me, and I was sort of trying to hit them away with my sticks.
Yeah, right.
I won't go into it in too much detail, but the bottom, I ended up killing one of them. They were genuinely rabid. If I'd laid down, they would have eaten me. One of my friends said, one of my friends, not this one, but I think they were sort of like lions. Basically, you know how lions hunt? They look for sort of the weakest member of the pack. They've seen all these people rushing past with sort of next to no sort of body fat on them, and then this sort of hobbling fat thing came along at the end. Right, okay, we'll take this one. I got in at the end of the day, and people said, "Oh, so what happened to you today?" So I was like, "Oh, I got attacked by wild dogs," and they're like, "Phil, you're just having a different race to everybody else." At the end of that day as well, the Paris Orchestra came out. Opera, sorry. It was phenomenal. More foot shots. That's before I sort of set off. On the last half marathon day, it was like a little operating table, and that's crossing the finish line. Strangely, crossing the finish line was sort of the least emotional part for me. For me, it was all about the journey and being out there and just actually really, really enjoying the experience. So when I got over the finish line, I didn't have a massive outwelling of emotion or anything. I crossed, and that was kind of it. For me, it was much more about the 7 days and the journey.
How did you kill the dog? How did you kill the dog?
I killed dog by stabbing it with my stick.
That's what we learned to do in the army these days.
I used the poles.
Army training standard.
I used the poles initially.
Yeah, like Bear Grylls. You can imagine stalking, can't you? Hiding behind a bush. Yeah. So the point is, and his race was really different to mine, and you can imagine, if Stu was talking, if you're racing, it's quite a different thing to literally just surviving to the end of the race. And when we first entered, 3 years before, practically, neither of us were trying to compete. It was just a let's complete. There was no thought of trying to do well. And it's only with a kind of bit of training and suddenly starting to do quite well, and you compete against the same people that are racing in the Sahara, and then you start thinking, oh, well, I'm better than they are. So actually, I might have a chance of beating them, and then actually doing quite well. And this whole top Brit thing only appeared to me when I was watching the Cracknell documentary earlier on. I thought, right, that's right, I need to go and beat him. And as soon as you announce to anyone that you're going to essentially become the top Brit, it's quite arrogant. So you immediately become a target of kind of a bit of, who do you think, why do you think you can win, And essentially it is a race amongst the British people because you kind of discount all the other nationalities because you don't know who they are. And they don't speak your language, so, it's a race amongst the Brits, basically. And so when you get to that, I was on the train going down there, and I was properly, my hands were really shaking, I was really, really nervous. It was a bit like going to school for the first day because I was about to go and meet people that some knew who I was and some didn't. And a lot of then suddenly they go, is that the guy that wants to? Oh, that's the guy I've heard he wants to go and win. Oh, okay, cool. And you do feel a bit odd. So, but my strategy was I knew that I could do this. So I kind of didn't know for absolute certain, but I had a 99% certainty that I thought I could do quite well. But obviously coming back at the end of each time, and I can't show you any slides because I literally don't have a photo. I don't have a photo of the single race. There is one, and he wants to charge me 200 quid for it. And it wasn't even a very good one of me anyway. I was up a rock somewhere. But if you're coming back, if you're meeting as I was Phil, and and he's going, how's it going? I was going, yeah, well, I'm doing all right. I'm 20 whatever, and still top Brit. And he's going, oh great. How's your day? And he's talking about surviving against dogs, drips, blisters coming out of every orifice. It's quite difficult to kind of know what to say because you can't be happy. You are generally happy that you're doing well, but you can't do that because everybody else is looking at you going, God, So my experience of the race was actually, I would say, it was, without sounding weird, quite a lonely one because there was no one to talk to. I was the fastest English-speaking person in the entire thing. I speak fluent French and Spanish, but there weren't that many French and Spanish people to chat to even then, and even then they were from Catalan or something, and I didn't speak Catalan. So, so it was kind of a strange thing. The coolest thing, though, is running with the Moroccans. And you saw a photo, there was a chap called Marco Olmo. He's a bit of a legend in the ultra world. He's won the UTMB a couple of times, and he's like 65. This man looks like the BFG, and he is literally this godlike runner. And to actually see him in the flesh and actually run with him is pretty cool. But my strategy each day was essentially to run by feel. I didn't take a watch because it was too heavy, and then it run out of batteries, and then you've got dead weight. I didn't want to chuck away a 300 quid watch. So and a lot of them rely on solar power, and not solar power, they need to be recharged. I didn't want to carry a solar power charge. So I just got rid of anything that I didn't think I didn't need a watch. What am I going to look at my splits and go, I'm not doing that? I just thought run as well as I could. So my aim was not to be sick at the end of the finish line, but just to finish comfortably knowing I could do the same again the next day and the next day. I didn't really know because I hadn't done any long runs beyond 20 miles. That's my longest run in prep for it. So, suddenly going off and running 52 miles on day 4 was a bit of a weird experience. But life in camp, I got the whole thing. I was, amongst the Brits, you get sectioned off by nationality. So, the French are on one side, which is probably a good thing, and we're on the other side. And we don't see anyone. You're literally just alone. I mean, half the time the camps weren't even erected. There were still all the Berbers, I can't even think, the Moroccan people. They were stubbing up the tents, which weren't glamorous. They were just literally poles with a bit of rag on top. And so half the time I was on my own, just putting my feet up, and I'd immediately have my shake and just sit there and just think. And then I'd wait for the internet place to roll up, and then people would start to arrive, and then immediately I would go off and chat to people because you want to say, how is it for you? And that was it. Every day I was the first, and suddenly it became like, I'm like, who am I competing against? Who is my competition? It's not the Moroccans because I don't live in the desert. My Bikram yoga was my introduction to it. I'm pale skinned. But one thing, there was a benefit to being short, and that is, I was the same height as Ansel, and if you're short, then you don't need so much water, you don't need so much food. Fine, I may not be able to reach the top shelf of my kitchen, I have to ask someone, but there are a few benefits of just needing less. And therefore, and think about that weight thing for a second, because you know, if I was carrying the same weight as Phil, as weighing 61 kilos, I mean, that's carrying essentially, you know, over whatever it is, 15-20% of my body weight. So I had to minimise how much I was carrying to essentially be efficient. I knew I could run the distance, I knew I could run with weight, and I'd done enough OMS to know what it felt like with kind of a bit less weight. But my heaviest my rucksack weighed on average about 5 kilos during my training. Didn't see the point in making it heavier because more risk of knees going. My main competition was a Welsh chap, and I met him on the first day, and we actually ran together for a bit, and we didn't realise we were in the sort of lead, and we saw this British photographer, and we said, oh, you know, are we the first? And he said, yes, you are. And then this chap, lovely man, he kind of sped off, and this was at the beginning of the dunes, and the dunes, it's quite difficult to run across them. Again, being light, you're kind of not sinking quite so much, which is good, but it was just a case of just surviving. They're so beautiful, but you just want them to end. At the very end of the dunes, I bumped into him again. I said, well, you know, you're doing really well. I've done lots of these. You know, I've done one marathon. That's my Welsh accent. And I said, oh gosh, wow, that's really good. So, but I wasn't going to hang around and chat. So I just, you know, went off, and I kind of kept to my pace and, you know, kept to my plan. I was running by feel, and he'd gone a bit too hard. Anyway, back in camp, I said, you know, he arrived, you know, a few minutes later, and I said, well, mate, what marathon was that? What did you do? And he said, oh, I did the London Marathon back in 2001 or something. And I said, oh gosh, how did you get on? And he said, I did okay, 2:31. And I thought, gosh, that was your first marathon. And I was a bit kind of like, who is this guy? That's really impressive. And then I suddenly realised, actually, you know, you can't take anything for granted because there are some really, really quick people. And just because you might run, and my best marathon time is 2:49. And in the great scheme of things, I'm happy with that. But compared to 2:31, that's a big gap. There's a big, big gap. In the London Marathon, that's like 300 people. So here's my coach, and I, you know, chatted to him every day, and but there was no rivalry, but it's no like, oh, you're doing well. It was genuine kind of, you're running to the best of your abilities. So therefore, it's not a case of, I'm going to try and run a bit harder, because if you do that, then you blow up, and then you don't finish, which is bad. And you hear of this all the time. The guy before Cracknell, a chap called Ian Sharman, who became this kind of quite well known this year for becoming the fastest man to complete the Rocky Raccoon 100, and did it in 12 hours, which is pretty amazing. And suddenly people said, God, this guy's incredible. And he came 13th in the Marathon Sables, like 2 years earlier. But he'd actually done it once before and failed to complete it because he blew up too early. The friends, the camaraderie of the place is incredible. And I really got to soak it up because I pretty much passed around the place like a padre. If I had sweets, I would have given them out, except I was trying to get their sweets because I was not hungry, but everyone says, do you want some food? You go, and then they want to get rid of weight, and you go, well, of course I'll take it. You'd be mad not to. But I did meet some genuinely wonderful people, and you heard them, their stories about, you know, they've done 120 miles a week of training, and they've been walking with rucksacks forever. And you kind of stay a bit quiet, because if they suddenly go, oh God, you've only done 50 miles a week, and it becomes, so there's this kind of strange thing where you always don't want to talk about your experience, because no one can really there's no one to really kind of understand. They kind of go, that's really good, but everybody's really pleased for you. And you have to kind of ask them lots of questions. And so you just soak in this atmosphere. You spend half the time queuing for the internet. I set up this clever little email so I could send an email to my blog, so then that would get updated. And then I spent an hour every day queuing for the internet. And then they have this rubbish keyboard, which is like a rubber strip thing, and you're tapping away with one key, one finger. And then at the end of it, I said, oh, did you get my blogs? And not a single person that didn't actually work. So I spent, about 6-7 hours of my day. One of the exciting things is the long day, and everybody kind of thinks about the long day. And essentially the top 50 start 3 hours later at midday in the heat of the sun, and everybody else starts at 9 o'clock. And it's a very strange experience watching everybody leave. And there were 3 British people in the top 50. I was currently, I think I was 22nd or 23rd then, so I was quite safely in there, which is kind of good and bad. There's another guy that was, the third guy was 49th or 50th, and he was raging. He was so annoyed because he thought, oh God, I don't want to have to, I'm going to start later, it means I'm going to finish later, and there's a gap between maybe, overall times, between the first person and the 50th, you're looking at, I don't know, overall 8 or 9 hours over the course of the thing. That's the kind of maybe 8 hours. So just because you're in the top 50 doesn't mean you're going that much faster. But it was a very wonderful thing, because that's the first time suddenly you get to see everybody, because actually at the front it's really spaced out. And one of the best moments happened actually for me was running with this Moroccan chap at about I don't know what time, when it started getting dark at about 6 or 7 o'clock. And he had this, I had this tiny pencil because I ditched my big light and I'd gone for this tiny thing, which is rubbish for seeing anything. And the only way to do that was to merge our torches together, and he had a rubbish torch as well. So we barely could see anything, but I just kind of looked from side to side and I thought, this is so cool, because Moroccans are a bit like seeing, I don't know, a dinosaur. Because, you know, you never see Moroccans when you're running, and it's quite exciting for me. And that's probably the thing I would take back. And looking back, you know, there is a bit of an anticlimax. Well, it's not an anticlimax, we're discussing this. It's kind of, when you get to the finish line, you've crossed the finish line, you know, 6 times already. It's kind of, you got used to the process, and suddenly you go, gosh, this is it. And everybody races on the last day, because it's the day when people have kept back and they go, right, 17 kilometres to go, I'm going to peg it now. And so people pegged it. And it's a bit kind of disconcerting when you've been kind of running really hard all week, and then suddenly you're being overtaken by people you've never seen before, because you see the same people every single day. And so, yeah, coming to the end is a bit of like, oh, right, okay, cool. But you've got your thing. I was pipped to the post, 20th position by a girl called Laurent, and she beat me by 11 seconds. Now, if you kind of think 11 seconds over the space of a week, I would have not taken that P-stop, you know, earlier on. You know, just kept on going, or whatever. You kind of think, well, 11 seconds, if I'd known that. But I didn't. And in fact, she was about, I don't know, 10 minutes ahead of me in terms of time at the beginning of that day. But, you know, I didn't realise she was going to take it easy or whatever. And so a bit annoying. But then I turned out she'd actually won the MDS like the year before, the 2 years before that, and she actually was like the 100k trail champion. I felt a bit better about the fact that she'd beaten me. You know, she was actually pretty good. And the last thing is, it's a really weird thing, but the average age actually of people doing the MDS is a lot older. I mean, you kind of, I mean, almost parents' age. I mean, I don't say this, you know, it's a weird thing to say, but you actually, if you're in your 30s, you're young to be doing this. You know, most people in their 40s, probably 50s, and there's a good reason for that. One, because they've kind of, their wives are more understanding.
There's a guy who's 79 years old.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. I mean, it's everybody's so much older, and so it's just it's an incredible waste, because you just see this variety of people that you would never normally see, and everybody's so pleased to be there and so pleased to finish. But it's a very sobering experience doing the MDS, and I think anyone who wants to do it should do it. But it's worth noting that there are better races out there that cost less. The Transalpine Run, which I kind of think might be a better race, costs €500 as opposed to, you know, €4,500, whatever that cost. There are cheaper and better, and this is what I would call, you know, this is actually, you know, that was the point of our whole, you know, 3 years of chat. We talked about this forever prior to it happening, and then suddenly you realise there are much cooler races out there, and then it's the beginning of an episode of wonderful adventures, and you kind of start finding the next toughest challenge. But it's so that's pretty much. In fact, there's a couple of photos. That's the end. The 3 guys that I ran with pretty much missed the race. And if you have any questions.